Okay, I wanted to get on here and chat quickly about a bit of an interesting topic which I've come across recently, or in the last year or two, which has been running shoe nostalgia. Oftentimes you'll hear people on Reddit threads or forums, long runs as well, people will chat about a shoe which they had a couple years ago, which they think was the best of all time. They absolutely adore it. They have an old pair in their back cupboard, which they're kind of saving for a rainy day. And I find it an interesting conversation on a couple of different levels. Firstly, I think it's pretty interesting to see the difference in perception to reality of what the shoe was actually like to run in. A lot of the time, context of when you were wearing it plays a lot into how you remember it. Also, what you've done since then, the shoes that you're wearing, the races that you're training towards. I find it very interesting to see the difference between those two things. Secondly, I think it's pretty cool to see the development of shoe tech over time, especially recently. 5 years can make a massive difference in midsoles, carbon plates, cutouts, uppers and outsoles. There's a lot that can change over that time period, so it's pretty cool to compare. And then the third part, more entertainment value than anything else. I think it's pretty funny to see people come to terms with the fact that their beloved trainer doesn't feel as good as they remember it, and they were in fact wrong, and they shouldn't be reviving the Vomero 12 or the Pegasus Turbo, because our expectations of what a shoe does can change over time, and sometimes what we remember is not what we actually want anymore. Two big examples where I've seen this play out are with the original Hoka Clifton, which was revolutionary for the time in terms of max stacked, rocketed, cushioned daily trainer. People absolutely adored it, but they slowly became bitter at the future releases, the Clifton 4, 5, 6. People said that it was getting firmer, heavier, harder. They didn't like it as much as the original Clifton. And so Hoka called their bluff, and they did a re-release of the original Clifton, same midsole, same outsole, same upper, exactly the same shoe. And people didn't like it. Their memory of the Clifton was kind of shrouded in the fact that it was such a big difference to anything that they'd ever worn. It felt so soft, so cushioned, so smooth. But over time, as they got used to it, as they kind of went through the next couple of models, their memories became a little bit blurred, and it was called out that day. A lot of people didn't like it. They refused to believe that it was the same shoe, but it was. Another key example of this was the release of the Pegasus Plus last year, which I guess was a kind of re-release of the Pegasus Turbo, which was one of the most popular shoes of all time. Versatile, snappy, you could use it for workouts, races, daily training as well. Some people say that it was discontinued because Nike realized that they were selling one shoe rather than an entire lineup for different purposes. But either way, they did release the Pegasus Plus as a kind of Peg Turbo 3, and kudos to Nike, they did adjust it a little bit to try and, compensate for a bit of that nostalgia effect. They made it taller, they made it an entire ZoomX midsole, so a bit softer, a bit smoother. But even then, people still found this to be too firm, too flat, it bottomed out, didn't have the same response that people remember. And so overall, I don't think that Nike ended up winning against the strength of nostalgia that was felt for the Pegasus Turbo. People these days are just too used to the high stacked, rocketed, stiff daily trainers with heaps of cushioning underfoot. They're just not going to want a shoe like the Pegasus Turbo anymore. So it's kind of less about Nike being able to replicate it and more about the fact that people's perceptions or kind of expectations of a shoe have just changed a little bit. All of that is a very long-winded warm-up for me to say that I wanted to test my own nostalgia today on one of my all-time favorites, which was the original Asics Novablast. I haven't actually been in the running space for nearly as long as many of you would have been. I've only been running seriously for about 5 years now, so start of 2020, I picked up the Novablast on its release, and at the time, that was a game changer for me. First real pair of running shoes. It was a bit of a game changer in the marketplace as well in terms of energetic foam in a daily trainer, reasonably lightweight, bouncy, responsive. You could use it for a fair few paces, and it had the protection to go long as well. I really enjoyed it. I have 2 pairs of this shoe, put about 900 Ks in each of them, run them into the ground, and since then, with the Novablast 3, 4, the 5, I've kind of had the general feeling that the shoe has been regressing a little bit. To me, in my mind, the original Novablast is still the best, and it's kind of become a bit of a betrayal of what the original Novablast was. My general feelings in my head before I kind of did this test was that the Novablast 5 has become mushy, soft, a bit too mellow. They've kind of made it an everybody shoe, making it more stable, more wide, more accommodating. and it kind of lost the cheekiness, the kind of rebellious nature of the original, which I thought made it so special. So this here is actually a fresh pair. I have my old pair in the cupboard somewhere, but I managed to find a fresh pair on eBay for about 80 bucks. I took it for an hour of easy running last night, running just over 11 kilometers in the heat. And then this morning, after my hour of easy running again, I took it for a 2K run, side by side, 1 foot on each shoe with the Novablast 5 to compare how it felt as I was actually on the run. We'll run through the shoe from top to bottom and give a nice little comparison, but we'll start with some specs, which kind of caught me off guard because as well as underfoot, these shoes are actually pretty different on paper as well. This has 32mm of foam in the heel with a 10mm drop, which is compared to now a 41.5mm stack with an 8mm drop. This shoe has a lot more protection, a lot more foam, a much wider base as well, and I was really not expecting there to be that much difference. Nowadays, this is almost classified as a kind of minimalist shoe, a more snappy, nimble trainer, but back then it was considered to be one of the most, unruly, high-stacked cushion trainers that you could get your hands on. Nowadays, 40mm or more is kind of the standard, and that has been a pretty big shift in the last 5 years. The other thing that really caught me by surprise in these two shoes was the weight difference. 295 grams versus 266 is very, very noticeable underfoot. I thought this shoe at the time felt quite nimble, versatile. I used it for tempos and races. I didn't really feel like it was holding me back, but this is just significantly lighter, lower inertia underfoot, which really did surprise me. It goes to show how much better the foam technologies are getting in terms of density. They're able to put lighter weight foams with bigger stacks, wider bases underfoot, and it's not going to come at the cost of excess weight. Quick run through of the upper. I think it's fair to say that the upper has actually come a long way over the last 5 years. This is softer, more comfortable, way more padding in and around the heel counter, whereas this is quite harsh. The tongue is this nice neoprene style material, gusseted in on both sides, whereas the Novablast original slid all over the joint. Laces as well, we had these like cheese wire laces which cut across the top of my foot, which I did not remember. Whereas here in the Novablast 5, they're softer, more comfortable. Overall, the upper here is just so much more comfortable and plush and accommodating, whereas this kind of feels like a harsh torpedo that you're strapping to your foot, quite narrow through the midfoot, does open up into the toe box, but it just kind of feels a little bit unrefined, a little bit harsh. So that has been a pretty big improvement, which I was not really expecting to see. Can't remember having any issues with this shoe whatsoever, but it does just go to show that things can change without you even noticing it. Moving down to the midsole, this is where I was much more optimistic that the Novablast would be a better pick than the Novablast 5, mainly due to the firmness of the midsole. This is more of a kind of firm, dense foam, which I felt was more responsive, more resilient, more able to handle a variety of paces, where I felt like I was kind of getting a bit of a sink-in feeling in the Novablast 5, bit mushy, bit squishy, although it is quite comfortable. Overall, I would say when I actually got out there on the run, the difference between the two shoes was not as much as I was expecting. I think the way that I see it, up to about the 40-minute mark, the Novablast 5 does feel nicer than the original, just because it's smoother, it's more comfortable, it's more kind of, more plush and gentle on the legs. But once I get up to the hour mark, I think this is where the Novablast kind of edges it out, just in terms of being a bit more structured and a bit more stiff underfoot, which kind of feels like it locks into my stride a bit nicer, whereas this is kind of holding me back. This is definitely more stable than the original Novablast as well. Wider base, some midsole sidewalls in and around the heel, whereas this, you're kind of, it's quite a squirrely shoe. If you don't have the ankle stability to handle it, it was quite unruly. But what kind of really surprised me was the fact that this midsole was just not as soft or kind of, accommodating as I remembered. I never felt like I had hot spots or any real, stiffness or harshness from the foam. But on that 11K run, I felt like it was just a little bit clunkier, a little bit stiffer underfoot. I didn't feel like I was getting the same level of joy as I remember from those fond 2000 Ks of running that I put into the first two pairs. I think overall my nostalgia has definitely clouded my memory of the feel of the midsole of this shoe. It's definitely not as fun as I remember, and that definitely will be kind of in part due to the fact that I'm trying shoes like the Evo SL, the Neo Zen, the Adios 9 as well, coming through with some great foams, nice midsole geometries. It's definitely not as special as I recall, but I do still think that I was right in my perception of the softness of this shoe and the fact that I would prefer this for those longer runs. I would say that I was expecting to enjoy the Novablast much more than the Novablast 5 for every single run, but I think I will concede that this shoe is more comfortable for easy recovery runs. This shoe does end up coming through a little bit more harsh, a little bit more stiff, a little bit less forgiving if you were going to do anything shorter, slower, especially if your legs are a bit beaten up. Moving down to the outsole, there was one key difference which I wanted to point out, which was this forefoot pod, trampoline pod I think it was called. In the original Novablast, it was quite a stiff pad of foam with a rubber pod put on top. Really incentivized the forefoot strike. If you got up onto it, punched into it, gave you a really nice response back. But in the Novablast 5, with the softer foam, I don't think it gives you anything more than the rest of the midsole, which I guess makes it more democratic. It's kind of going to feel the same for most people. But in the Novablast, I really enjoyed the fact that it rewarded you for getting up onto your toes. And that would lead me to say that this is a faster shoe, or incentivizes faster running more than the Novablast 5. But there is also the factor of weight which comes into it, where this shoe does feel considerably lighter on foot, and I feel like you can still turn the legs over reasonably quickly. Still say this is a bit faster, but I was caught by surprise how light this shoe is and how that kind of ended up making it a little bit of a closer race than I originally thought. So bringing that all together, I would say that overall, my perception of the Novablast has been skewed a little bit by nostalgia. I was expecting to bring this shoe back into the rotation and really enjoy it, you know, a blast from the past, pun intended. And I was really expecting to, yeah, have a good time doing some daily runs, rack up 40 or 50 Ks and then do this comparison. But after 11 Ks of running, I don't really want to wear it much more. I've had a really good time in the Evo SL, the Neo Zen. There's some really great daily trainers out there right now. And although I still think this is runnable, it definitely isn't as competitive as I thought it would be. In terms of the comparison to the Novablast 5, I think I was correct in a couple of points, in terms of the firmness of the midsole working for longer runs, in terms of the trampoline pod incentivizing faster running. I think I was on point there, but I was quite surprised by the differences in comfort in the upper, the softness and protection underfoot. Like, I really remember this being a really fun, bouncy, you know, soft, comfortable shoe, but this definitely is a step above. And although it is a little bit mushy, is a little bit squishy, the fact that it's so much lighter definitely brings it closer in terms of pace versatility than I was expecting. So where does this leave me with the Novablast line? I'm not really sure. I don't think that I can continue to say that the original Novablast was the best ever, but this is still not a shoe that I'm really that keen on using in my rotation because of the softness, because of the squishiness. Maybe this is just a shoe line that I kind of have to let go. Maybe it's not the fun, versatile, unruly daily trainer anymore. Maybe it's just that budget, comfortable, entry-level daily trainer that most people are going to get, which just does what it says on the tin and does the job pretty well. Pretty cool to get a comparison and kind of test how my feelings have changed over the years. A little bit disappointing, if I'm honest. But yeah, overall pretty interesting to see. I'd be interested to see whether other people have done any tests like this. They've bought an old pair of shoes or dug a pair out of the cupboard and they kind of realized that it didn't feel good, or maybe they realized it felt great. If you have a story like that, whack it down in the comments, we'll have a look. But yeah, overall, that's my little comparison between the original, the Novablast 5. Maybe the Novablast just isn't for me for the next little while.